The door of Rita's diner swung open at 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. Margaret Reynolds walked in, 78 years old, trembling hands, a worn cardigan that had seen better days, the fabric thin at the elbows where decades of leaning on kitchen counters and garden fences had rubbed the wool down to almost nothing. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon light. 53 years of wear had made the gold thin in places, but she would sooner cut off her finger than remove it. Her wrist bore bruises, purple and yellow marks that looked exactly like fingerprints, as if someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave their signature on her skin. 8 men sat in the back booth, leather vests, patches that read Thunder Road Motorcycle Club, coffee cups scattered across the table, half-eaten burgers on plates. They were laughing about something. Voices low and comfortable, the way old friends do when they have known each other long enough that silence is not awkward and humor does not need explanation. Margaret did not hesitate. She walked straight toward them. Every step looked painful. Her breathing was labored, shallow. She stopped at the edge of their booth. The largest man looked up. His name was Axel Cole, 52 years old, gray streaked through his beard, kind eyes that had seen too much of the world's darkness, but somehow still held light. Margaret's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Please, I need help. My caregiver told me to stay quiet." The laughter died. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward this elderly woman who stood before them like she was presenting herself for judgment, like she had walked 2 blocks on arthritic legs and a failing heart just to reach this moment. Like everything in her life had led to this single Tuesday afternoon. What Axel Cole did not know yet was that this woman's silence had lasted exactly 184 days, and that her husband had saved a life in Belgium during the winter of 1944, a life that would connect them all in ways none of them could imagine. But for now, there was only this moment. An elderly woman with bruised wrists asking 8 strangers for help, and the choice they would make in the seconds that followed. Axel stood immediately, 6'4" of solid muscle moving with surprising gentleness. "Ma'am, take my seat." The other bikers shifted without being asked. They formed a protective circle around the booth as Margaret sank into the vinyl seat Axel had vacated. The diner went quiet. Conversations at other tables trailed off. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed to pause. Axel knelt beside the booth so he was at eye level with Margaret. "I'm Axel. These are my brothers. You're safe here." He paused, watching her trembling hands. "Can you tell me what happened?" But to understand how Margaret Reynolds ended up in that diner booth, we need to go back. Back to the life she had before everything fell apart. Back to Bobby. Margaret Reynolds had been married for 53 years. Her husband's name was Robert. Everyone called him Bobby. He had served in World War II with the 101st Airborne Division. Battle of the Bulge, Belgium. Winter of 1944 and 45. He came home with stories he never told and nightmares that woke him up until the day he died 14 months ago. Lung cancer, the kind that eats you from the inside out. Slow and merciless, the kind that gives you just enough time to say goodbye, but not enough time to say everything that needs to be said. They lived in a small cottage on Maple Street in Millbrook, a coastal town in California where everyone knew everyone and secrets were currency. The house was nothing special from the outside. White paint, blue shutters, a garden in the backyard that Bobby had planted himself when he retired 20 years ago. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs that Margaret used in cooking, basil and rosemary and thyme. Bobby would spend hours out there with his hands in the soil. Said it helped him forget things he wanted to forget. Said the earth did not judge a man for what he had done in war. After he died, the garden grew wild. Margaret did not have the strength to maintain it, did not have the heart either. Looking at those overgrown plants reminded her that Bobby's hands had touched that soil. And now his hands were gone. The house still held pieces of him. His favorite coffee mug sat on the kitchen shelf. Dark blue ceramic with a chip on the handle from the time he dropped it. Rushing to answer the phone. Margaret could not bring herself to use it, could not bring herself to put it away either. It just sat there, a small monument to a man who used to drink coffee at that counter every morning at 6. Photos lined the mantel. Bobby in his dress uniform, young and serious. The kind of serious that came from being 20 years old and watching friends die in frozen Belgian forests. Their wedding day. Both of them smiling like they knew something the rest of the world did not. Margaret in a simple white dress her mother had sewn. Bobby in a borrowed suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders. An American flag folded in the perfect triangle sat in a shadow box on the bookshelf. The flag from his funeral. Army Honor Guard had presented it to Margaret with those words she would never forget. On behalf of a grateful nation. Margaret's wedding ring never came off. 53 years of wear had made the gold thin in places, but she would sooner cut off her finger than remove it. That ring was the last promise Bobby had given her, the last thing he had put on her body with his own hands. Their daughter Sarah lived in Portland now. 7 years had passed since they had spoken properly. The relationship had been strained for a long time. Sarah had moved to Portland for work when she was 38, a nursing job at a hospital there. Good money, good opportunity. But Margaret had taken it personally. You are abandoning us. That is what Margaret had said. Words she regretted the moment they left her mouth but could never take back. Sarah had tried to stay in touch. Phone calls on Sundays, visits when she could afford the time off. But the distance grew. Not just miles. Something deeper. Something that happens between mothers and daughters when neither one knows how to say I am sorry. Then Bobby got sick. Sarah flew home when she heard the diagnosis. Lung cancer, stage 4, 3 to 6 months, maybe less. The argument happened on the third night of Sarah's visit. Margaret wanted to care for Bobby at home, wanted him to die in the bed where they had slept together for 50 years, wanted to be the one holding his hand when he took his last breath. Sarah wanted hospice, professional care, nurses who knew how to manage pain, a facility where Bobby would not suffer more than necessary. Both of them were right. Both of them were wrong. The words that came out were ugly. The kind of words that families say when they are terrified of losing someone they love. When fear turns to anger because anger is easier than grief. You always think you know best, Sarah had shouted. You would rather let Dad suffer than admit you cannot do this alone. And Margaret had shouted back, you left. You moved across the country. You do not get to come back now and tell me how to take care of my own husband. Sarah had packed her bags that night, left before morning, did not come back for the funeral, did not come back at all. 7 years of silence. Margaret told herself she did not care, told herself Sarah had made her choice, told herself a daughter who would abandon her dying father did not deserve forgiveness. But late at night, when the house was quiet and Bobby's chair sat empty in the living room, Margaret would think about Sarah as a little girl, running through that garden, laughing at nothing. The way children laugh when the world is still simple and parents are still invincible. Those were the nights Margaret cried. Bobby died on a Thursday morning in October. Margaret was holding his hand just like she wanted. His breathing had been getting shallower for days. The home nurse said it would not be long, said he probably could not hear anymore, said the body shuts down in stages. But Margaret talked to him anyway. She told him about the garden, how the tomatoes were coming in strong this year, how she had made sauce from them just the way he liked. She told him about the weather, about the birds she had seen at the feeder, about nothing and everything. Because 53 years of marriage meant you could talk about nothing and it would still mean something. His last words came around 3 a.m. Stand up for what is right, Maggie, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. Then his hand went slack in hers, and Margaret Reynolds became a widow. The funeral was military honors, a flag-draped casket, a bugler playing taps, 7 rifles firing 3 volleys into the gray October sky. Army honor guard in dress uniforms folding that flag with precision, corners tucked, edges sharp, presenting it to Margaret with words she would hear in her dreams for years. On behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation. She did not cry at the funeral, could not cry. Something inside her had gone numb, like the part of her that processed grief had simply shut down to protect her from the magnitude of what she had lost. Sarah did not come. Margaret watched the empty seats in the back of the church, watched the door that never opened, told herself it did not matter, told herself she did not need a daughter who would skip her own father's funeral. But it mattered. It mattered more than Margaret would ever admit. The months after Bobby died were the hardest of Margaret's life. Simple things became mountains. Cooking for one person when you had spent 53 years cooking for 2. Remembering to take medication when there was no one to remind you. Getting to doctor appointments when your husband used to drive. The loneliness was crushing. She would sit in Bobby's favorite chair, the brown recliner that still held the impression of his body, still smelled faintly of him. She would stare at his photo on the mantel. Young Bobby in his uniform. And she would wonder how she was supposed to keep living when half of her had been buried in the ground. Bobby's military pension came every month, $3,200, reliable as sunrise. It was enough for Margaret to live on. Cover the mortgage, buy groceries, keep the lights on. When Bobby died, the pension transferred to her as his surviving spouse. The Department of Veterans Affairs sent a letter confirming it. That money was her lifeline. But money could not fix the forgetting, could not fix the days when Margaret would realize she had not eaten since breakfast, when she would find herself standing in the kitchen at midnight, not remembering why she had gotten out of bed. Her heart medication sat in bottles on the counter. Metoprolol for the arrhythmia, blood pressure pills, the little white tablets that kept her heart beating in rhythm. Some days she forgot to take them. Some days she took them twice because she could not remember if she had already taken them. The neighbors noticed. Martha next door would see Margaret wandering in the garden at odd hours, talking to plants that had long since died, standing in front of the mailbox for 20 minutes like she had forgotten what she came out for. Someone should do something, Martha told her husband. That woman is going to hurt herself. But no one did anything, because that is how it works in neighborhoods. Everyone sees, no one acts, everyone assumes someone else will handle it. That is when Margaret decided to hire help. The agency was called Senior Care Solutions. Their website looked professional, testimonials from satisfied families, photos of caregivers smiling with elderly clients, 5 stars on every review. Margaret called the number on a Tuesday afternoon. Her hands were shaking. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat, like admitting Bobby was really gone and she really could not manage alone. A woman answered with a pleasant voice, took down Margaret's information, asked questions about her needs: mobility, medications, meal preparation, transportation. "We have someone perfect for you," the woman said. "Her name is Linda Morrison. Certified, experienced, excellent references. She can start Monday." Margaret hung up the phone feeling something she had not felt in months: hope. Linda Morrison arrived on a Monday morning at 8 sharp. She drove a white Honda Accord, clean, professional. She wore scrubs and a warm smile, carried a folder with paperwork and credentials. She was 35 years old, pretty in an unremarkable way. The kind of face you would not remember in a crowd, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes that seemed kind, seemed being the operative word. "Mrs. Reynolds," Linda said, extending her hand, "it is so nice to meet you. I have heard wonderful things about you." Margaret did not know what wonderful things anyone could have said, but the flattery felt nice. Felt like someone was paying attention to her for the first time since Bobby died. The first month was everything Margaret had hoped for. Linda arrived each morning at 8. She cooked breakfast, scrambled eggs the way Margaret liked them. Not too runny, toast with butter, coffee that was always the right temperature. She helped with laundry, folding clothes with care, organizing them in drawers the way Margaret had always organized them. Noticing the small details that mattered, she drove Margaret to doctor appointments, sat in the waiting room, took notes when the doctor spoke so Margaret would not forget important details, asked thoughtful questions about dosages and side effects. She seemed genuinely caring. She laughed at Margaret's stories about Bobby, asked to see photo albums, sat on the couch for hours looking at pictures of their wedding, their anniversary trips, Bobby in his uniform, Bobby in the garden, Bobby holding baby Sarah. "Tell me about this one," Linda would say, pointing to a photo, and Margaret would talk, would remember, would feel for a moment like Bobby was not entirely gone because someone was listening to stories about him. Linda asked about the garden Bobby had planted, how Margaret missed working in the soil, how her arthritis made it impossible now, how the tomatoes had died because no one was there to water them. "We should plant something new," Linda suggested, "something easy. I will help you." Margaret smiled, really smiled for the first time in months. She thought hiring Linda was the answer to her prayers. She had no idea it would become her worst nightmare. During the second month, things began to shift, subtle at first, small changes that Margaret noticed but could not quite name. The way Linda would ask questions about finances, the way her eyes would flick toward the mail when it arrived, the way she would mention the pension casually, like she was just making conversation. $3,200 a month, Linda said one afternoon. "That is good money. Your husband took care of you." Margaret nodded, not thinking anything of it. "You do not need to call Sarah," Linda said another day when Margaret mentioned wanting to reach out to her daughter. "She is busy with her own life. You do not want to be a burden." The word landed like a stone in Margaret's chest. Burden. Was that what she was? When bills arrived in the mail, Linda intercepted them. "Let me handle these," she said, her voice taking on a firmer edge than Margaret had heard before. "You should not stress about money. That is what I am here for." She asked for Margaret's checkbook. "It is safer if I hold on to this. You know how scammers target elderly people. I will make sure your account stays secure." Margaret handed it over because Linda had been so kind, because Linda seemed to know what she was doing, because Margaret was tired. So tired of trying to manage everything alone. By the third month, the isolation had set in like fog. Linda changed Margaret's phone number to stop the scammer, she explained. They call constantly. This way, only people who really need to reach you will have the new number. Except Linda never gave the new number to anyone. Not to Martha next door, who used to check on Margaret. Not to the few friends Margaret had left from church. Not to the doctor's office. And certainly not to Sarah. When neighbors came by asking about Margaret, Linda met them at the door with a concerned smile. She needs quiet and rest, Linda would say. Doctor's orders. She is not receiving visitors right now. The neighbors nodded, understanding, and gradually they stopped asking. Margaret found herself alone more and more, even when Linda was in the house, because Linda had stopped sitting with her, stopped looking at photo albums, stopped asking about Bobby. Now Linda spent hours in the guest bedroom with the door closed, said she was doing paperwork, said she was managing Margaret's affairs, said Margaret should not worry about the details. Linda convinced Margaret to give her power of attorney. Just for emergencies, she said. If something happens and you cannot make decisions, someone needs to be able to act on your behalf. I am here every day. It makes sense. Margaret signed the papers because it did make sense, or it seemed to at the time. She was tired, confused, missing Bobby, missing Sarah, missing the person she used to be before grief hollowed her out. She signed because she trusted Linda, and trust is the sharpest weapon a predator can wield. The fourth month brought financial exploitation that Margaret did not recognize until much later. Bobby's pension deposits went into an account Linda now controlled. Margaret's credit cards, the ones Linda said she would keep secure, were being used for purchases Margaret never made. Designer handbags from department stores, expensive dinners at restaurants Margaret had never heard of, jewelry from stores she had only seen in commercials. When Margaret asked about the bills, Linda became cold, dismissive. I am managing your finances. That is what you hired me for. Do you not trust me? Margaret stammered, I do not remember buying. You are confused, Linda cut her off. That is why I handle the money. So you do not have to worry about things you cannot remember. Margaret stopped asking questions after that, because maybe she was confused. Maybe she was forgetting things. Maybe the grief and the loneliness had finally broken something in her brain that could not be fixed. Months 5 and 6 were when the physical abuse started. It began small, the way abuse always begins. A grabbed arm when Margaret walked too slowly. A shove toward a chair when Linda was impatient. Words that cut deeper than hands ever could. You are useless, Linda said one afternoon. Do you know that? Cannot even remember to take your own pills without someone reminding you. And then the day Margaret asked about her pension one too many times. She was sitting at the kitchen table looking at a bank statement she had found in the trash. The numbers did not make sense. The balance was too low. Much too low for someone who received $3,200 every month and spent almost nothing. Linda, Margaret said, her voice trembling, where is my money going? Linda's hand shot out, gripped Margaret's wrist hard enough that Margaret cried out, hard enough to leave bruises that would last for weeks. Stop asking about money, Linda hissed, her face close to Margaret's. Eyes that Margaret had once thought were kind, now flat and cold. You are confused. You are old. You do not understand how finances work anymore. You are hurting me, Margaret whispered. Linda squeezed harder. If you are going to cause problems, maybe you do not need your medication today. She released Margaret's wrists, walked to the counter where the pill bottles sat, picked them up, held them just out of reach. These pills keep you alive. Did you know that? Without them, your heart could just stop. Please, Margaret said, I need those. Then stop asking questions. The bedroom door started locking from the outside that same week. Margaret heard the installation happening. Drill sounds, metal against wood. When she asked what was going on, Linda explained with that same cold smile. For your own safety, you wander at night. I do not want you falling and hurting yourself. But Margaret did not wander. She lay in bed counting ceiling cracks, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of captivity pressing down on her chest. The lock clicked every night after Linda put her to bed, and every morning Margaret would wake to the sound of that lock opening. Linda's face in the doorway, that smile that no longer seemed warm. Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds. Time to start another day. Linda's threats became explicit as the weeks passed. If you tell anyone about our arrangement, they will put you in a nursing home. Is that what you want? To die alone in some facility where nobody knows your name. Margaret thought about Bobby, how he had wanted to die at home, how important that had been to him. The idea of dying in a nursing home, surrounded by strangers, was worse than anything Linda could do to her. So she stayed quiet, day after day, week after week, watching her life drain away through bank statements she was not supposed to see, through bruises she hid under long sleeves, through a door that locked from the wrong side. She stayed quiet because she did not know what else to do. The seventh month was when Margaret discovered the full truth. Linda had left shopping bags in the garage, hidden behind boxes, but not hidden well enough. Margaret had gone out there looking for Bobby's old tools, wanting to feel close to him, wanting to touch something his hands had touched. She found the bags instead. Designer purses still in their dust bags. Names she recognized from magazines. Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Coach, jewelry boxes from Tiffany, the blue color unmistakable. Receipts stuffed into envelopes. Margaret's hands shook as she unfolded them. Her own credit card numbers printed at the bottom. Her own name. Purchases she had never authorized. $8,300 at one store. $6,200 at another. Plane tickets to the Bahamas. $5,400 for round-trip airfare and a resort stay. Car payments for a BMW. Margaret did not own a BMW, had never owned a BMW, but $12,000 over 6 months had gone to payments for one. Cash withdrawals. Large amounts from ATMs across town. $15,100 just in cash. Margaret added the numbers in her head, then added them again because the total could not be right. $47,000 in 7 months, her entire savings, Bobby's pension, everything they had worked for, gone. She found bank statements hidden in the same boxes, her accounts nearly empty. The pension still coming in every month but going out just as fast. Transferred to accounts Margaret did not recognize. Spent on things Margaret would never buy. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the papers. She looked at her medication bottles that night, really looked at them for the first time in months. The pills inside did not look right. They were lighter, different shape. The metoprolol she had taken for years was small and round and pale pink. These pills were white, oval, wrong. She went to the computer in the living room, the one Linda said she should not use because it was too complicated. She typed in the markings on the pills. Multivitamins, generic store brand multivitamins. Linda had been giving her vitamins instead of heart medication. For months, Margaret's arrhythmia, her blood pressure, conditions that required daily medication to keep her alive, all managed with nothing but supplements and lies. She could have died. She could still die, any day, without warning. Her heart could simply stop because the medication keeping it steady was sitting in Linda's bathroom or sold or thrown away. For 184 days, Margaret Reynolds stayed quiet. 184 mornings of hearing that lock click open. 184 days of swallowing pills that did nothing. 184 nights of lying in bed wondering if she would wake up. She thought about telling someone, the mail carrier who came every day, the neighbors she could sometimes see through the window. But Linda's words echoed in her head. Who will believe you? A confused old woman versus a licensed professional. And Margaret believed it. Because when you are 78 years old and everyone around you treats you like you are already half gone, you start to believe that maybe you are. But on this Tuesday morning, something changed. Margaret woke up before dawn, the way she had woken up every day since Bobby died, lying in the dark, listening to the silence, counting the hours until Linda would unlock the door. She thought about Bobby. His voice came to her clearly, the way it had not come in months. Like he was standing right there in the room with her. Stand up for what is right, Maggie, even when it is hard. She thought about Sarah, her daughter somewhere in Portland, living a life Margaret knew nothing about, probably thinking her mother had given up on her, probably thinking the silence was intentional. She thought about the garden, the tomatoes Bobby had planted, the way his hands looked covered in soil, the pride in his eyes when he brought in the first ripe tomato of the season. I survived raising a daughter during hard times, Margaret thought. I survived my husband going to war and coming back changed. I survived 53 years of marriage with all its joy and pain. I survived losing him. I survived the loneliness that came after. I did not survive all that just to die in silence in my own home. The lock clicked open at 7:30. Linda's face appeared in the doorway. That smile, those eyes. Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds. I will be running errands today. I will be back by 4. Margaret nodded, said nothing. Let Linda think everything was normal. The front door closed at 8:15. The lock clicked. For the first time in months, Margaret was alone. Really alone. Without Linda somewhere in the house. Without eyes watching her every move. She sat in the stillness for several minutes, feeling the absence of Linda's presence like a physical weight lifting off her shoulders. Then she moved. Slowly because her arthritis made every step hurt, but deliberately. With purpose she had not felt in months, she went to the drawer in the hallway table where she used to keep her address book. The old one. The one Bobby had written in with his careful handwriting. She had not seen it since Linda took over, assumed it was gone like everything else. But it was still there, pushed to the back, covered by old newspapers. Linda must have missed it. Margaret opened the book. Bobby's handwriting stared back at her. In case of emergency, he had written at the top of the first page. Below it, names and numbers, old army buddies, neighbors who had moved away, Sarah's number, the old one from before Linda changed everything. Margaret found the phone Linda had given her, the one with the new number no one knew. She dialed Sarah. The automated voice told her the number was disconnected. She tried the neighbors. Martha's number. No answer. Jim and Patricia down the street. No answer. Each failed call felt like a door slamming shut. Margaret walked to Bobby's favorite chair, the brown recliner that still held the impression of his body. She sank into it, feeling the worn leather, smelling the faint ghost of him that still lingered after 14 months. On the side table sat his photo, dress uniform. That serious expression. She picked up the frame, traced his face with her finger. What do I do, Bobby? Who can I tell? The answer came not from memory, but from something deeper. From 53 years of knowing a man who never backed down from a fight, who believed that doing right mattered more than staying safe. Then Margaret remembered something. Earlier that week, Linda had driven past Rita's diner on the way to the pharmacy. Margaret had looked out the window and seen motorcycles parked outside. 8 of them, chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. She remembered something Bobby had said years ago, about a buddy from the service who had gotten help from bikers when the VA failed him. How these men on motorcycles had shown up at his house, made sure the government kept its promises. Dangerous people are sometimes the safest people, Bobby had told her. They understand loyalty. They understand what it means to have someone's back. Margaret checked the clock. 2:15 in the afternoon. Linda would return at 4, less than 2 hours. Rita's diner was 2 blocks away. 2 blocks of sidewalk. 2 blocks of putting one foot in front of the other with arthritic joints and a heart running on nothing but willpower. She could not drive. Linda had taken her license months ago, said the DMV required retesting at her age, said Margaret had failed, except Margaret had never taken any test. 2 blocks. It might as well have been 2 miles, but Margaret Reynolds was done being quiet. She found Bobby's old tape recorder in the closet, the one he used to record himself reading letters during deployment so she could hear his voice when he was gone. The battery still worked. She waited. At 9:30, Linda came back briefly, needed to pick something up, stood in the kitchen complaining about traffic. Margaret pressed record in her cardigan pocket. I told you to stop asking about the money. Linda's voice was harsh. If you mention it again, I will make sure you regret it. The tape caught everything. Then Linda left again. Back to her errands, back to whatever life she lived outside these walls. Margaret stopped the recording. She had evidence now, real evidence. Not just bruises that could be explained away. A voice, threats, proof she put on her cardigan. The one Bobby had given her for Christmas 10 years ago. Blue with wooden buttons. She grabbed their wedding photo from the mantel. She found a scrap of paper, wrote in shaky handwriting. If I do not come back, Linda did it. She tucked the note under the couch cushion where Linda would not find it unless she was looking. Then Margaret Reynolds walked out her front door. The afternoon sun was warm on her face. The first time she had felt real sunlight in weeks. Linda kept the curtains closed, said the light hurt Margaret's eyes, said she needed to rest. 2 blocks. Margaret started walking. Her hip ached with every step. The arthritis in her knees sent shooting pains up her legs. Her heart, beating without medication, fluttered irregularly in her chest. 1 block. She passed Martha's house, wanted to stop, wanted to knock on the door and beg for help. But Martha might call Linda. Martha might believe the licensed professional over the confused old woman. She kept walking. The diner appeared ahead, a low building with a neon sign. Rita's Diner, established 1967. The motorcycles were still there, 8 of them lined up like soldiers. Margaret stopped at the door. Her hand rested on the handle, cold metal against her palm. Inside, through the glass, she could see them, Men in leather vests, laughing, eating, living normal lives. What if they did not believe her? What if they called the police? Who would call Linda? Who would tell everyone that Margaret was confused? What if this was a mistake? She thought about Bobby. Stand up for what is right. She pulled open the door and stepped inside. Axel Cole had seen a lot in his 52 years. He had seen men broken by poverty, women destroyed by addiction, children abandoned by systems that were supposed to protect them. He had seen the worst of what people could do to each other. But something about this elderly woman standing in his diner booth made his chest tighten in a way he had not felt since the day his mother died. 5 years ago, nursing home. He had been working overtime trying to pay for her care, came to visit and found her dehydrated, confused. The night nurse finally bothered to check on her after 12 hours. His mother died 3 days later from complications that never should have happened. He saw his mother in Margaret's trembling hands, in the bruises shaped like fingers, in the way this woman held herself like she expected to be hit for speaking. The other bikers had gone quiet, all of them watching, all of them waiting. Doc Martinez leaned forward. 48 years old, former paramedic, he had left emergency medicine after 20 years because he could not save everyone. Could not watch one more person die while he stood there with his hands tied by regulations and insurance companies and a system that valued profit over people. But his training never left him. "Ma'am," Doc said, his voice gentle, "those bruises on your wrists, may I look at them more closely?" Margaret hesitated, then slowly pulled back her sleeves. The marks were unmistakable. Purple and yellow fingerprints wrapped around both wrists, some fresh, some older, layered on top of each other like a timeline of violence. Doc did not touch her, just observed with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too many injuries like this. His jaw tightened as he cataloged what he saw. "These are restraint injuries," he said quietly. "Someone grabbed you with significant force, multiple times. Some of these are a week old, some are more recent." He looked at Axel. His eyes said what his mouth did not. "There may be more injuries we cannot see." Margaret nodded slowly. "She grabs my arms when I ask questions. Sometimes she shoves me. Margaret's voice broke. Once she would not let me use the bathroom until I promised to stop talking about my pension." Axel's hands curled into fists on the table. The kind of controlled anger that came from years of channeling rage into productive action. He had learned long ago that anger without purpose was just destruction. But anger with a target could move mountains. A man at the far end of the booth spoke up. Flint Harrison, 44 years old, former police officer. He had left the force 3 years ago when he discovered his captain was taking bribes from drug dealers. He reported it, Internal Affairs buried it. The captain got promoted. Flint got frozen out. He quit the day his captain told him that sometimes you have to look the other way to keep the peace. Now he rode with Thunder Road and did the work that badges should have done, but did not. "Mrs. Reynolds," Flint said, his cop voice still there under the years of disillusionment, "do you have any documentation? Bank statements? Receipts? Anything that proves what she has been taking?" Margaret reached into her cardigan pocket, pulled out folded papers. Her hands shook as she smoothed them on the table. "I found these in the garage, hidden behind boxes. She must have forgotten about them." Flint examined the receipts. His eyebrows rose higher with each one. $8,300 at Nordstrom, $6,200 at Tiffany and Company, plane tickets to Nassau, car payments for a vehicle registered to someone named Linda Morrison. His voice was hard when he spoke. "These are all in your name, your credit cards, your accounts." "She has power of attorney," Margaret said. The words came out like a confession. "I signed it. I did not understand what I was signing." "That is fraud," Flint said. "Exploitation of a vulnerable adult. These are felony charges." He looked at Axel. Something passed between them. Years of riding together, years of understanding without words. This is not small time. This is organized, calculated. She knew exactly what she was doing. A man at the end of the booth had been quiet through the entire conversation. Ridge Hartley, 55 years old, gray at his temples, hands scarred from decades of mechanical work. He had been watching Margaret with an intensity that made the other bikers uneasy. Now he spoke. "Mrs. Reynolds, your husband. You said his name was Robert." Margaret nodded. Her voice softened the way it always did when she talked about Bobby. "Robert Reynolds, everyone called him Bobby. And he served in World War II, 101st Airborne Division." "Yes." Margaret's voice grew quieter. "Battle of the Bulge, Belgium, winter of 1944 and 45. He never talked about it much, but I know it changed him." Ridge went absolutely still. The color drained from his face. His hands gripped the edge of the table, hard enough that his knuckles turned white. "What unit?" Ridge asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret thought for a moment. "I am not sure of the exact. He mentioned the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. Something about the Bastogne sector." Ridge closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. This 55-year-old man who had survived combat and prison and decades of hard living was crying in a diner booth. "My father was there," Ridge said. "Sergeant William Hartley, 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, December 1944. Margaret's heart stuttered in her chest. The table went silent. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to fade away. Ridge's voice was rough with emotion. "My father told me a story. He told it to me 100 times growing up. About the day he should have died." He paused, gathering himself. "December 22nd, 1944, just outside Bastogne. The Germans were pushing hard, artillery everywhere. My father's squad was pinned down by machine gun fire. He took shrapnel to the leg, could not move, could not run." Ridge looked directly at Margaret. "A young soldier from another company saw him, ran through the fire, grabbed my father and dragged him back to the tree line, saved his life. My father asked his name. The soldier said Bobby Reynolds, from California. Then the fighting started again and they got separated." Tears were running down Ridge's weathered face now. "My father looked for Bobby Reynolds after the war, spent years trying to find him. Military records were a mess. People moved. Names got confused. He never found the man who saved his life. My father died 10 years ago, still talking about the soldier named Bobby who pulled him out of that killing field." Ridge reached across the table, took Margaret's hands in his. "Mrs. Reynolds, your husband saved my father's life in Belgium, in the snow and the fire and the death. He saved him, which means I owe your husband my father. I owe him my own existence. I owe him everything." He looked at Axel, then at each of the other bikers in turn. "This woman is under my protection. Whatever she needs, whatever it takes, we do this." Axel nodded slowly. The connection had changed everything. What started as helping a stranger in need had become something deeper. A debt that stretched across generations. A promise made in fire and blood on a Belgian battlefield in 1944. These men understood debts like that. They understood loyalty. Rita Sullivan appeared at the booth, 62 years old. She had owned this diner for 30 years. She had watched these bikers come and go, had watched them help people that no one else would help. She trusted them more than she trusted most police. She set down a fresh pot of coffee. "Whatever you boys are planning," she said quietly, "you be careful. And you," she looked at Margaret, "you are safe here, you understand? This is your home now if you need it to be." Margaret nodded, could not speak around the lump in her throat. Axel pulled himself back to the present, to the work that needed to be done. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, "we are going to help you, all of us. But first I need you to answer one question." Margaret wiped her eyes. "What time does Linda come back to your house?" She checked the clock on the diner routine. "Usually 4. She said 4 today." Margaret squinted at the clock. "It is 3:10 now." Axel looked at his brothers. "We have 50 minutes. Let us move." Margaret stood up from the booth. Her legs were steadier now. Something had shifted inside her. The fear was still there, but it was no longer alone. For 184 days, she had carried this weight by herself. Now there were 8 men willing to help carry it. "I am coming with you," she said. The bikers exchanged looks. "Mrs. Reynolds," Axel said carefully, "it might be safer if you stayed here. Hammer and Tank can protect you while we handle things." No, the word came out stronger than Margaret expected. "This is my fight. Bobby taught me that you do not let other people fight your battles. You stand beside them, even when it is hard." She looked at Ridge. "Your father was trapped under fire. Bobby did not wait outside while someone else pulled him to safety. He went in himself." Ridge smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes despite the tears still there. "She has got a point, Axel." Axel studied Margaret for a long moment, saw something in her eyes that he recognized. The same steel he had seen in mother before the system broke her. The same determination he had seen in every person who decided they would rather die standing than live kneeling. "All right," he said, "you come with us, but you stay close. You do exactly what we say. Understood?" Margaret nodded. "Hammer and Tank," Axel continued, "you two stay here. Keep the booth. If anything goes wrong, we need a fallback position." The 2 largest bikers nodded. "Ridge," Axel said, You call Sheriff Morrison. He knows us. We worked that domestic case with him 2 years ago. We need law enforcement aware before we get to the house. Ridge pulled out his phone. Flint, you are point on evidence collection. You know what to look for. Financial records, medication bottles, anything that documents the abuse. Flint was already making mental notes. Doc, medical documentation. Those bruises need to be photographed and cataloged properly. If this goes to court, we need evidence that holds up. Doc nodded. Got my camera in the truck. Axel turned to Margaret. Mrs. Reynolds, you know that house better than we do. You know where she hides things. You know her patterns. We are going to need your help. Margaret straightened her shoulders, felt Bobby's presence beside her, heard his voice in her head. Stand up for what is right. I will show you everything, she said. They moved toward the door. The whole diner had gone quiet. Other customers had been listening. Some were crying. An older man in a corner booth stood up as Margaret passed. He was wearing a Vietnam veteran cap. Give them hell, ma'am, he said quietly. Margaret nodded to him. They stepped out into the afternoon sun. The motorcycles gleamed in the parking lot, chrome and leather, and the promise of justice. Axel led Margaret to his truck, a black Ford F-250 that had seen better days but ran like it was brand new. He opened the passenger door for her, helped her climb in. She settled into the seat, hands still shaking, heart still fluttering. But something new was burning in her chest. Hope. She had not felt hope in 184 days. The drive to 847 Maple Street took 4 minutes. Margaret watched familiar streets pass by the window. The pharmacy where Linda picked up fake medication. The bank where Linda had drained her accounts. The neighbors who had stopped asking about her. Everything looked different now, sharper, more real, like she had been seeing the world through fog and someone had finally cleared the air. Axel parked 2 houses down from the cottage. The motorcycles pulled in behind him, engines cutting to silence. Ridge had gotten through to Sheriff Morrison. The sheriff was on his way, but stuck in traffic on the highway. 15 minutes out, maybe 20. They could not wait. Linda would be back at 4. They had 38 minutes. Axel gathered his brothers around the truck. Here's the plan. We go in, we document everything. We do not touch anything we do not have to touch. If Linda shows up early, we do not engage. We call the sheriff and wait. What if she runs? Steele asked. 41 years old, the tech expert, the one who could track digital footprints and hack security systems when the situation required it. Then we make sure she does not get far, Axel said. He looked at Margaret. Mrs. Reynolds, lead the way. Margaret walked toward her own house like she was approaching enemy territory. In a way, she was. The cottage looked peaceful from the outside. White paint, blue shutters, overgrown garden, an ordinary home in an ordinary neighborhood. No one would ever guess what had happened inside those walls. Margaret pulled out her key. Her hands were steadier now. The presence of these men behind her gave her strength she did not know she still had. She unlocked the front door. The smell hit them immediately. Stale air, medication. The particular scent of loneliness that settles into homes where people stop living and start merely existing. The living room was clean but cold, like a showroom that no one actually inhabited. Photos of Bobby were everywhere, wedding pictures, military portraits, candid shots from decades of marriage. Margaret paused at the mantel. Bobby's American flag in its shadow box, the flag from his funeral, folded in the perfect triangle. She touched the glass. I'm doing this for you, Bobby, she whispered. Doc headed straight for the kitchen. On the counter sat multiple medication bottles arranged in a neat row. He picked one up. Read the label. Metoprolol, beta blocker for heart conditions. He opened the bottle, poured several pills into his palm. They were white, oval, not pink and round like the real medication. He pulled out his phone, searched for images of genuine metoprolol, compared them to the pills in his hand. These are not right, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. These are multivitamins, generic store brand. He photographed the bottles, the pills, the prescription labels, every single detail. All of them, he continued, checking bottle after bottle. All fake. She has been giving Mrs. Reynolds placebos for months. He looked at Axel. His face was grim. This is not just abuse. This is attempted murder. If you have a heart condition and someone is withholding your medication, they are actively trying to kill you. The weight of that statement settled over the group like a physical thing. Flint moved to Margaret's bedroom. The room was small, sparse, a thin mattress on a frame, no television, no radio. The curtains were drawn tight, And on the door, he examined the lock. Deadbolt, he said. Installed on the outside, key operated. He tested it. The mechanism was smooth, well used. She locked her in, he said quietly. Every night, Mrs. Reynolds was a prisoner in her own bedroom. Margaret stood in the doorway watching. She told me it was for my safety, she said. Said I wandered at night, but I do not wander. I just lay there, listening, counting the cracks in the ceiling. Flint photographed the lock, the door frame, the marks on the wood where the deadbolt had been installed. Then he went to the closet. Mrs. Reynolds, you said the documents were hidden in here? Margaret nodded. Behind the boxes covered with blankets. Flint pulled out the boxes. They were exactly where Margaret had described. Bank statements going back 7 months. Credit card bills. Receipts stuffed into envelopes. He started photographing everything, working methodically. His police training made him thorough. Each page documented, each receipt time-stamped. The numbers were staggering. Designer handbags from Nordstrom, $8,300. Jewelry from Tiffany, $6,200. A vacation to the Bahamas. Round-trip airfare and resort stay, $5,400. Car payments for a BMW, $12,000 over 6 months. Cash withdrawals, large amounts from ATMs across town, $15,100. $47,000, Flint said, his voice flat. In 7 months, she drained this woman completely. Steele checked the guest bedroom, the room Linda used when she stayed overnight. The closet was full of expensive clothes, tags still attached to some items. Boxes from Saks Fifth Avenue stacked in the corner. A laptop sat on the desk, password protected. On the nightstand was a planner. Steele flipped through it. One entry caught his attention, Mag's pension, circled in red ink. $3,200 with arrows pointing to a date 2 weeks in the future. Below it, Linda had written 2 words, enough, leave. Steele brought the planner to Axel. She had an exit date, he said. She planned to drain the accounts and disappear. Axel's expression hardened. This was not opportunity. This was premeditated. Margaret had been walking through the house, touching things, remembering the life she had before Linda, the life that had been stolen from her. She stopped at Linda's bathroom. Something caught her eye. She pushed open the door. On the counter sat prescription bottles, with her name on them. Margaret Reynolds, the real labels, the real pharmacies. But these bottles were full. Margaret picked one up, opened it, pink pills, small, round, her real metoprolol. Linda had kept the real medication here, in her own bathroom, either to sell or to use it as leverage, or simply because keeping Margaret sick made her easier to control. Doc, Margaret called out, her voice steady despite what she was seeing. Doc came quickly. Margaret handed him the bottle. She had my real medication the whole time, she said. She kept it for herself while I was dying. Doc photographed the bottles, compared them to the fakes in the kitchen, documented everything. Evidence, irrefutable evidence. Ridge had gone to the garage. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the space where Margaret had found the shopping bags, looking at the dust on the workbench where Bobby used to build things. Under a tarp in the corner, he found something else. A car. Margaret's car. A 2008 Honda Civic covered in dust. The license plates had been removed. The battery was disconnected. Linda had made sure Margaret could not leave, could not drive herself anywhere, could not escape even if she found the courage to try. Ridge felt rage building in his chest, the kind of rage that came from understanding exactly how calculated this abuse had been. Every exit blocked, every option removed. Margaret had been trapped as surely as his father had been trapped under German machine gun fire. But his father had Bobby to pull him out, and now Margaret had them. Back inside, Flint found something that changed everything. In Linda's nightstand, buried under magazines, a folder. He opened it. Documents, medical records, financial statements. But not Margaret's. 2 other names, Helen Crawford, age 81, Frank Whitmore, age 79. Both had been clients of Senior Care Solutions. Both had Linda Morrison listed as their caregiver. Both had died within 6 months of Linda starting work. Both had similar financial patterns. Depleted accounts, unusual purchases, large cash withdrawals. Both deaths had been ruled natural causes. Flint's blood ran cold. Axel, he said, his voice flat, you need to see this. But Axel came over, read the documents. His face went pale. She has done this before, Flint said. Margaret is not her first victim. These 2 people, Helen Crawford and Frank Whitmore, they died under her care. He looked at Margaret. You were going to be the third. Margaret sat down heavily on the edge of Linda's bed. She killed them, she whispered. We do not know for certain, Flint said, but the pattern, the finances, the timing, it is identical to what she did to you. Except you are still alive. Because you asked for help, Ridge said. Because you walked into that diner. Margaret thought about 184 days of silence. How close she had come to just accepting her fate. How easily she could have been Helen Crawford or Frank Whitmore, dead in her own bed with a diagnosis of natural causes. Crow's voice cut through the silence. It is 3:51. Through the living room window, they could see a white Honda Accord turning onto Maple Street. She is early. Everyone moved at once. Axel took command. His voice was calm, controlled. Nobody leaves this house. Ridge and Steele, back door. Flint, front. Doc, stay with Mrs. Reynolds. What about me? Margaret asked. You stay back, Axel said. We do not know how she will react. No, Margaret stood up. I told you, this is my fight. I am not hiding. Axel started to argue. Ridge put a hand on his shoulder. Let her, he said quietly. She has earned this. Axel looked at Margaret, saw the steel in her eyes, the same steel that had gotten her out of that house and into his diner. All right, he said, but stay behind us. The Honda Accord pulled into the driveway. Through the window, they watched Linda get out, shopping bags in her hands. Macy's logos on the sides. More purchases made with someone else's money. She looked around casually. No suspicion. No awareness that her entire world was about to collapse. She walked to the front door, unlocked it, stepped inside, and stopped. 8 men in leather vests stood in her living room. Margaret Reynolds stood in the middle of them. Linda's shopping bags hit the floor. What? She stammered. What is this? Who are you? Axel stepped forward. His voice was quiet, more dangerous than if he had shouted. We are friends of Mrs. Reynolds. Linda's eyes darted from the bikers to Margaret to the door behind her. Flint had moved to block it. There was no way out. Her professional mask slid into place. The warm smile, the concerned caregiver voice, years of practice making the lie look like truth. I do not know what is happening here, but you need to leave. This is my client's home. You are trespassing. Axel did not move, did not raise his voice, just stood there like a mountain. Your client, Doc said, stepping forward. He held up the medication bottles, the fake ones from the kitchen. The client whose medication you replaced with vitamins? Linda's mask flickered, just for a second, but they all saw it. I do not know what you are talking about. Those are her prescriptions. These are multivitamins, Doc said. His voice was steady, clinical, the way he used to sound in emergency rooms when he was telling families their loved one did not make it. I am a former paramedic. I know the difference. He held up another bottle, one from Linda's bathroom. Her real medication was in your bathroom. You kept her sick on purpose. Linda took a step backward. You are confused. She is confused. That is why I manage her care. Flint held up the bank statements, all of them. 7 months of theft documented in black and white. $47,000, he said. Stolen from an elderly widow over 7 months. Designer bags, jewelry, vacations, all on her credit cards. She authorized those purchases. Linda's voice was rising now. She asked me to buy things for her. She insisted. Did she insist you lock her in her own bedroom? Axel's voice was quiet, more dangerous than shouting. He pointed to the deadbolt on the bedroom door. We found the lock, installed on the outside. Key operated. You imprisoned her in her own home. That was for her safety. Linda was backing toward the kitchen now. She wanders. She could fall. She could hurt herself. And Helen Crawford, Flint asked. Did she wander too? Linda froze. What about Frank Whitmore? Flint continued. He held up the folder. Your other clients, the ones who died under your care. He spread the documents on the coffee table. Same pattern. Drained accounts, suspicious deaths, both ruled natural causes. Linda's professional mask shattered completely. You do not know what you are talking about, she said. Her voice was shaking now. Those people were old. They were sick. They died of natural causes. Then you will not mind explaining that to the sheriff, Axel said. He is on his way. Linda's eyes went wild. She bolted. Not toward the front door where Flint stood, not toward the back where Ridge and Steele were waiting. She ran toward the kitchen, toward the side door that led to the garage. But Margaret was standing in her path. 78 years old, arthritic, heart condition. 5'3" of widow who had survived 184 days of hell. Linda tried to push past her. Margaret did not move. Get out of my way, Linda snarled. You stupid old woman. You have no idea what you have done. Margaret looked up at the woman who had stolen her money, who had withheld her medication, who had locked her in her own bedroom and made her feel worthless and crazy. I know exactly what I have done, Margaret said. Her voice did not shake. I asked for help. Then she reached into her cardigan pocket, pulled out Bobby's tape recorder, and pressed play. Linda's own voice filled the kitchen. I told you to stop asking about the money. If you mention it again, I will make sure you regret it. The recording continued, every threat, every cruel word, captured on magnetic tape that morning when Linda thought no one was listening. When the tape stopped, the silence in the house was absolute. Linda's face had gone white. You, she whispered. You recorded me. Margaret stopped the tape. Her hand was steady. Bobby always said a good soldier documents everything. Ridge appeared behind Linda, Steele beside him. There was nowhere left to run. The sound of sirens grew closer. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows. Sheriff Morrison's patrol car pulled up outside. Behind him, another vehicle. A woman in a suit stepped out. Detective Sarah Collins, Elder Abuse Task Force. She had been investigating Linda Morrison for 6 months. Ever since Frank Whitmore's family filed a complaint, the case had stalled. Not enough evidence, not enough living witnesses. Until now, Collins walked into the house, took in the scene. The bikers, the evidence spread across the table. Linda Morrison trapped in the kitchen with nowhere to go. Mrs. Morrison, Collins said, we have been looking for you. Linda started crying. The professional mask was gone. Now she was just desperate. You do not understand, she sobbed. I was helping her. I was taking care of her. She does not know what she is saying. She is old. She is confused. Collins looked at Margaret. Mrs. Reynolds, are you willing to make a statement? Margaret nodded. Her voice was clear. I have been ready for 184 days. Collins turned to Sheriff Morrison. Take her in. Morrison approached Linda with handcuffs. His voice was formal, professional. Linda Morrison, you are under arrest for elder abuse, financial exploitation, assault, unlawful imprisonment, and suspicion of homicide in connection with the deaths of Helen Crawford and Frank Whitmore. No, Linda screamed. No, you cannot do this. She is lying. She is old and confused, and she does not know what she is saying. Morrison clicked the handcuffs into place. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. They led her toward the door. Linda looked back at Margaret. Her mascara was running. Her professional facade was completely destroyed. You will regret this, she hissed. You stupid old woman. Who do you think they will believe? Margaret met her eyes, did not look away. I think they will believe the evidence, she said, and the tape recording and the testimony of 8 witnesses who found me with bruises on my wrists. She paused. But mostly I think they will believe me because I am telling the truth. They put Linda in the back of the patrol car. The blue and red lights kept flashing. Neighbors were gathering on the sidewalk. Martha from next door, Jim and Patricia from down the street. All the people who had stopped asking about Margaret because Linda told them to. They watched the woman they had trusted being taken away in handcuffs. They did not know yet how wrong they had been, how much they had missed, how close their neighbor had come to dying alone in her own home. But they would learn, everyone would learn. Detective Collins stayed behind to collect evidence. She documented everything Flint had found. The bank statements, the medication, the folder with Helen Crawford and Frank Whitmore's information. This is enough for multiple felony charges, she said. Combined with the previous cases, we are looking at life in prison. She looked at Margaret. Mrs. Reynolds, you saved your own life today, but you may have saved others too. If Linda had gotten away with this, she would have found another victim. Margaret thought about Helen Crawford, 81 years old, probably lonely, probably desperate for help, just like Margaret had been. She thought about Frank Whitmore, 79 years old, probably a veteran too, probably proud and stubborn and unwilling to ask for help until it was too late. She thought about the victim who would have come after her, some other widow, some other forgotten elder, trapped in their own home, watching their savings disappear, dying slowly while everyone believed the nice professional caregiver. That person would have been real, would have suffered, would have died because Margaret stayed silent. But she did not stay silent, and now that person would never exist. Axel drove Margaret to Grace Haven as the sun started to set. She sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar streets pass by, the same streets she had walked that morning. But everything was different now. She was not a prisoner anymore. She was not confused. She was not alone. "You did good today, Mrs. Reynolds," Axel said quietly. Margaret looked at him. "I almost did not come," she said. "I stood outside that diner for 5 minutes trying to decide if it was worth the risk, if anyone would believe me." "What made you go in?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Bobby," she said finally. "I thought about what he would have done. He never backed down from a fight. Not in Belgium, not in life. He always said, stand up for what is right." "Even when it is hard," Axel finished. Margaret nodded. "Even when it is hard." They pulled into Grace Haven, a small house on a quiet street 2 towns over. The kind of place that did not advertise its existence because the people who needed it could not afford to be found. Elena Rodriguez met them at the door. 58 years old. Former abuse survivor. She had been where Margaret was when once. Years ago, a different predator, a different trap, but the same feeling of helplessness, the same belief that no one would help. She had gotten out, and she had spent the rest of her life making sure other women could get out too. "You are safe here," Elena said when Margaret walked through the door. "Linda does not know this place exists. Nobody does except the people who need to." She showed Margaret to a small bedroom, clean sheets on the bed, a quilt handmade by a former resident, each square a different pattern, each one representing someone who had survived. A window with a view of the garden, a nightstand with a lamp, books, a box of tissues, and a lock on the door. A real lock, one that worked from the inside. Margaret tested it. The mechanism clicked into place. She stood there for a long moment, hand on the lock, feeling the weight of what it meant. For 7 months she had been locked in, someone else controlling when she could leave, when she could sleep, when she could use the bathroom. Now she controlled her own door. It was such a small thing, and it was everything. That night Margaret slept, really slept. Not the half-awake terror that had defined her nights for 184 days. Not the hypervigilance of listening for footsteps. Not the fear of a key turning in a lock. She slept for 9 hours straight, and when she woke up, the sun was streaming through the window and birds were singing in the garden. And she was safe. She was free. 4 months later, the trial began. In those months, Margaret had transformed. She lived with Sarah now. Her daughter had flown down the morning after the arrest. They had cried together, talked for hours, forgiven each other for 7 years of silence. Sarah's house in Portland had 4 bedrooms. One looked out over the Willamette River. Margaret planted a garden there. Bobby's tomatoes, the ones she had brought from Millbrook. They grew strong in the Oregon soil. She met her grandsons for the first time, Tyler and Mason, 12 years old. They made her a certificate in crayon. Brave grandma. She hung it on the refrigerator. She gained back the 15 pounds she had lost. Color returned to her cheeks. She smiled easily, laughed with her grandsons. But she still had nightmares sometimes. Still woke up thinking she heard a key in a lock. The therapy helped. The support group on Thursdays helped. Sarah helped most of all. Detective Collins had worked tirelessly. Helen Crawford and Frank Whitmore were exhumed. The autopsies revealed what everyone suspected. Helen had high levels of sedatives in her system. Signs of malnutrition. Frank had been denied his heart medication. Just like Margaret. Both deaths were reclassified as homicides. Collins discovered something else. Linda was not working alone. She was connected to 12 other caregivers across 3 states, an organized elder abuse ring, 27 potential victims over 5 years. The case had grown far beyond one elderly widow in Millbrook, Riverside County Courthouse. Margaret walked up the steps with Sarah on one side and Axel on the other. All 8 members of Thunder Roads sat in the gallery. They had driven from Millbrook to be there. "This is what we do," Axel had said. "We see things through." Linda Morrison sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. The professional mask was gone. Her hair was unwashed. Her eyes were hollow. Prison had stripped away all the polish and charm. She looked like what she was, a predator. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Forensic accountants testified about the money, $47,000 from Margaret, $38,000 from Helen Crawford, $45,000 from Frank Whitmore, $130,000 minimum. They showed the timeline. Designer bags, jewelry, vacations, cars, a pattern of systematic theft. Dr. Martinez testified as an expert witness. He explained the medication tampering, how metoprolol treats heart arrhythmia, how without it, a patient risks sudden cardiac arrest. He showed the vitamin pills, the real medication, the evidence of intentional endangerment. This was not neglect, he said. This was attempted murder. The medical examiner testified about Helen and Frank, how both showed signs of medication withholding, how the deaths had originally been ruled natural due to age, how new evidence revealed homicide. Detective Collins presented Linda's journal, the exit dates circled in red, the amounts calculated, the cold planning of every decision. She revealed the network, 12 caregivers, 3 states, 27 victims. Linda was not just a participant. She was a recruiter, an organizer. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was an enterprise. On the 4th day, they played the tape recording. Linda's voice filled the courtroom. I told you to stop asking about the money. If you mention it again, I will make sure you regret it. More threats followed. Without your medication, your heart could just stop. They will put you in a nursing home. You will die alone. Several jury members were crying. Linda stared straight ahead, emotionless. On the 5th day, Margaret testified. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high. Sarah sat in the front row. The Thunder Road bikers filled the row behind her. Ridge gave her a small nod. The prosecutor's voice was gentle. Mrs. Reynolds, please tell the jury what happened. Margaret told them everything. 7 months of abuse, every locked door, every stolen dollar, every moment of fear and despair. She told them about 184 days of silence, about how close she had come to staying quiet, about how much courage it had taken to ask for help. The defense attorney tried to rattle her on cross-examination. Mrs. Reynolds, is it not true that you have memory problems, that you forget things, that you sometimes confuse events? Margaret looked at him steadily. I am 78 years old, she said. I forget where I put my keys sometimes. I forget the mailman's name. She paused, let the silence build. But I do not forget being locked in my own bedroom. I do not forget bruises on my wrists. I do not forget watching my life savings disappear while a woman I trusted told me I was crazy. She turned to the jury. I am not confused. I was made to feel confused. There is a difference. The defense attorney had no response. At the end of her testimony, the prosecutor asked if she had anything to add. Margaret spoke directly to the jury. There were 2 other people, Helen Crawford and Frank Whitmore. They died under Linda Morrison's care. They cannot speak anymore. Their voices were silenced forever. She paused. But I can speak. I am speaking for them. And I am telling you the truth. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, assault, unlawful imprisonment, attempted murder of Margaret Reynolds, 2 counts of murder in the deaths of Helen Crawford and Frank Whitmore. The courtroom erupted. Sarah grabbed Margaret's hand, squeezed it tight. The Thunder Road bikers cheered from the gallery. Linda showed no emotion as the judge prepared to sentence her. Miss Morrison, the judge said. His voice was hard. You preyed on a vulnerable widow who trusted you. You betrayed that trust in the most callous way imaginable. Evidence suggests you are part of a larger criminal enterprise that has victimized dozens of elderly Americans. He paused. Let the weight of his words settle. You are a predator, Miss Morrison, and predators belong in cages. The sentence came down like a hammer. Life in prison, no parole for 40 years, full restitution of $130,000 plus damages. Additional charges pending from the network investigation. They led Linda away. She did not look back. Outside the courthouse, Margaret stood in the sunshine. Sarah beside her, Axel beside her. 8 bikers in leather vests forming a protective circle that had become family. It is over, Sarah whispered. Margaret looked up at the sky, blue and clear and endless. No, she said, it is just beginning. 2 years later, Margaret Reynolds sat in her garden in Portland. The tomato plant she had brought from Millbrook had flourished. It had grown tall and strong, produced fruit every summer, a piece of Bobby living on in this new soil. She had planted more around it, peppers, herbs, the same vegetables Bobby used to grow. The garden was smaller than the one on Maple Street, but it was hers. And every time she worked in the soil, she felt Bobby beside her, heard his voice in the rustle of leaves. Tyler and Mason ran through the yard chasing each other. 14 years old now, tall and loud and full of energy. They called her Brave Grandma. The certificate they had made her still hung on the refrigerator. Margaret had recovered fully, back on correct heart medication. The 15 pounds she had lost had returned. The bruises were long healed. She smiled easily now, laughed with her grandsons, felt joy again. Emotional healing took longer. Therapy twice a month. Support group on Thursdays. She still had nightmares occasionally. Still woke up sometimes thinking she heard a key turning in a lock. But the nightmares were fading. Each month they came less frequently. Each month the fear lost a little more of its grip. Her relationship with Sarah was stronger than it had been even before Bobby's illness. They cooked together using his old recipes, told stories about him over dinner, kept his memory alive in the small rituals of daily life. They had forgiven each other, forgiven themselves, let go of 7 years of anger that had never really been about hospice care or funeral attendance. It had been about fear, fear of losing Bobby, fear of losing each other, fear that love was not enough to hold a family together. But love was enough. It had always been enough. Margaret volunteered at the Portland Elder Justice Center 3 afternoons a week. She answered the abuse hotline, talked to people who were where she had been, scared, trapped, believing no one would help. She told them her story every time. I was silent for 184 days. I thought I was too old to matter, too confused to be believed. I thought I would die in that house and no one would ever know the truth. But I was wrong. I asked for help and help came. In 2 years, she had personally helped 6 people escape situations like hers, 6 people who might have died, 6 people who were alive because Margaret Reynolds had found her voice and refused to be silent. Thunder Road stayed in touch. Axel called once a month, video calls where Margaret showed him the garden and he showed her whatever motorcycle he was working on. They visited when they passed through Portland, would show up unannounced with flowers and stories and the particular kind of loyalty that came from having been through something together. Ridge called too. He and Margaret would talk for hours about Bobby, about Belgium, about the Battle of the Bulge where a young soldier had pulled his father from certain death. The debt had been repaid, but the connection remained. The charity ride happened every year. Thunder Road organized it. 200 motorcycles raising money for the Elder Justice Center. 200 riders who believed that protecting the vulnerable was not just a hobby, but a calling. This year, Margaret flew to Millbrook specifically to attend. She stood outside Rita's diner as 8 familiar motorcycles pulled up. Chrome gleaming, engines rumbling. The same sound she had heard that Tuesday afternoon 2 years ago when she walked through that door and changed her life. Axel got off first, walked over, hugged her tight. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, "or should I call you Mrs. Portland now?" Margaret laughed. "Call me Maggie. Bobby did." They walked into the diner together, sat in the same booth where she had first asked for help. Axel sat across from her, same positions as 2 years ago. Rita brought coffee, set the cups down with a smile. "You two are a long way from done making trouble, I expect." Axel grinned. "Wouldn't have it any other way, Rita." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the diner fill with riders, watching the community gather for something bigger than themselves. "You ever regret it?" Axel asked finally, asking us for help. Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Every single day." Axel's face fell. Margaret smiled. "I regret not doing it sooner. I had 184 days of hell because I was too scared to walk through that door, too convinced that no one would believe me, too afraid to trust strangers." She looked at Axel. "But you were not strangers. Not really. You were people who understood what it meant to protect someone who could not protect themselves. You were exactly what I needed. I just wish I had found you sooner." Axel wiped his eyes. Tough old man pretending not to cry in a diner booth. "You found us when you were ready," he said. "That is what matters." 200 motorcycles participated in the charity ride that day. Margaret rode in a sidecar attached to Axel's motorcycle. Wind in her hair, sun on her face. The roar of engines all around her, she thought about Bobby. He would have loved this, would have been right there beside her, probably on his own motorcycle, probably laughing at the absurdity of his 78-year-old wife riding with a biker gang. But he would have understood. He always understood. At the rally, Margaret spoke to the crowd. She stood at a microphone in front of 200 riders, in front of families and volunteers and reporters, in front of everyone who had gathered to support the Elder Justice Center. "I was 78 years old when I walked into Rita's diner," she said. "I had bruises on my wrists and fear in my heart, and I was convinced that no one would believe me." She paused. "I thought I was too old, too confused, too worthless to save. That is what my abuser wanted me to think. That is what abusers always want their victims to think." She looked out at the crowd. "But I was wrong. I asked 8 strangers for help, and they said yes. They did not ask what I could give them in return. They did not question whether I deserved their help. They just said yes." She took a breath. Age does not determine worth. Vulnerability does not mean weakness. And it is never too late to ask for help. The crowd was silent, listening. If you see someone suffering, Margaret continued, do not look away. Do not assume someone else will handle it. Do not tell yourself it is not your business. She thought about Martha next door, who had seen the warning signs and done nothing, who had accepted Linda's explanations because it was easier than getting involved. Everyone is your business, Margaret said. Every person suffering in silence is your responsibility, because you might be the only one who sees, the only one who asks, the only one who answers. She looked at Axel, at Ridge, at all 8 members of Thunder Road who had driven across the state to be here. These men answered when I asked, she said, and they saved my life. Not because they knew me, not because they owed me anything, but because that is who they are. She straightened her shoulders. Be who they are. When someone asks for help, answer. Always. The crowd gave her a standing ovation, and Sarah was crying in the audience. Tyler and Mason waved signs that said, Go Grandma, in bright letters. Ridge gave a military salute, the same salute he would have given Bobby. Axel wiped his eyes again, did not even pretend to hide it this time. After the rally, Maggie and Axel and Ridge sat on the curb outside Rita's diner eating ice cream. 3 people connected by a debt that stretched across generations. A promise made in fire and blood on a Belgian battlefield in 1944. A promise kept on a Tuesday afternoon in a California diner. Bobby would have been proud of you, Maggie, Ridge said. Margaret smiled. He would have been proud of all of us. She looked at the Thunder Road patch on Axel's vest, the lightning bolt striking the winding road. You never told me what that means, she said, the patch. Axel looked down at it. Sometimes life throws storms at you, he said. Lightning, thunder, things that seem like they are going to destroy you. He traced the winding road with his finger. But if you keep riding, if you do not give up, if you keep moving forward, even when the road is hard and the sky is dark. He looked at Maggie. You find your way through. Margaret nodded slowly. I found my way through, she said. Axel shook his head. No, Maggie, he said. You fought your way through. Big difference. The sun was setting over Millbrook, orange and pink streaking across the sky. The same colors Margaret had seen that first night at Grace Haven, when she had finally slept, when she had finally felt safe. She finished her ice cream, stood up, brushed off her pants. Same time next year, she asked. Axel grinned. Wouldn't miss it. Ridge stood up beside him. Until then, Maggie, take care of yourself. Margaret looked at these 2 men, these strangers who had become family, these unlikely heroes who had answered when she called. You too, she said. Both of you. She hugged them both. Then she walked to Sarah's rental car where her daughter and grandchildren were waiting, ready to go home. Back in Portland, in her garden, Margaret, at 80 years old, tends Bobby's tomato plant. The fruit is heavy and ripe, ready to pick. Tyler and Mason run across the yard. Grandma Maggie, Tyler shouts. Tell us the story again. Yeah, Mason adds, the one about the motorcycles. Margaret smiles, sets down her gardening tools, wipes her hands on her apron. Come here. Sit with me. The boys settle onto the grass beside her. Once upon a time, Margaret begins, there was a woman who was very scared. She had been hurt by someone she trusted, and she thought no one would help her. What happened? Tyler asks, even though he has heard this story 100 times. She walked into a diner, Margaret says, and she saw 8 men in leather jackets. They looked scary. They looked dangerous. But she was so desperate that she asked them for help anyway. Did they help her? Mason asks. Margaret looks at her grandsons, these beautiful boys she almost never met, these children who call her brave grandma and draw her pictures and ask for stories every night before bed. They said something she will never forget, Margaret says. They said you are safe here. She reaches out, takes each boy's hand, and she was, for the first time in a very long time, she was safe. The boys are quiet for a moment. Then Tyler asks the question he always asks. Grandma, were you the scared woman? Margaret squeezes his hand. Yes, baby, I was. But you are not scared anymore, Mason says. Right? Margaret looks up at the sky, blue and clear and endless. She thinks about Bobby, about the life they built together, about the way he held her hand in the hospital when Sarah was born, about the last words he ever said to her. Stand up for what is right, even when it is hard. She thinks about 184 days of silence, about the courage it took to walk through that diner door, about everything she has built since then. She pulls her grandsons close. No, she says finally, I am not scared anymore, because I learned something important. I learned that asking for help is not weakness. It is strength. And there are always people willing to help. You just have to be brave enough to ask. The sun is warm on her face. The garden smells like summer. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine rumbles. And Margaret Reynolds, survivor, advocate, grandmother, hero, smiles because she knows the truth now. It is never too late to find your voice. It is never too late to ask for help. And when someone asks, you answer. Always.